know on a cold January morning, might have been tempted to roll over back to that, but the fact that you're here speaks about how important this is. I want to thank Ms. Hall for inviting us and the whole committee for pulling this together. I'm going to be very brief and turn over to Michelle very quickly to actually go through the report. But I do want to highlight one thing. When you walked in your packet, you probably got something that said the Department of Justice needs your help, ideas, and input. And that is absolutely true. There is no one group or two groups or three groups who are advising us. We have made our findings, which Michelle will detail. But what we want from the community are solutions, ideas about how to improve the police department, how to improve the relationship between the community and the department, ways you think we can go moving forward. We are looking very forward to getting the ideas that come from today. But in addition to that, there's numbers at the bottom. That number is 622-3651. That's my direct number. So if you have ideas after today, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can call us, you can email us. We want your ideas. We want to hear them. We want to incorporate them. So thank you again. With that, I'll turn it over to Michelle, who will talk about what's actually in the report.
Good morning, everybody. And I just want to, again, thank Dr. Hall and thank everybody who worked really hard to put this together. It's great to see all of you here today, and I want to thank you all for coming out. So as Mike said, I am an attorney with the U.S. Attorney's Office here in Cleveland. So I'm essentially a Department of Justice lawyer, and I live and work here in Cleveland. And I was one of the lawyers that worked on the investigation that produced the finding that we're all here to talk about. And so I wanted to give you a very broad overview of what's in that. So I know that your packets do include a copy of our actual findings letter, which is very, very long. And so we don't expect you, if you haven't had a chance before this morning, to get through it all before you break out to discuss your ideas for solutions. So let me just give you sort of a very broad overview of what's in that letter. So basically, what we found through our investigation was that the department here, the Cleveland Division of Police, has a pattern or practice of engaging in use of excessive force. And the way that we reached that conclusion was we did a very long investigation. It took us about a year and a half from the time we began it till we're here today. And we reviewed thousands of pages of documents that we got from the department and from the city, and that included things like their use of force reports. It included the investigative files when they looked at deadly force uses, and it involved things like the department's policies and their training manuals. We spent a lot of time talking to people, so we rode along with police officers and observed them in doing their jobs. We talked to a lot more officers than we had the opportunity to ride along with. So we met with the police union. We actually went out to the district houses and talked to officers as they were, at work. We talked to the command staff of the department. And we also talked to a lot of the citizens of Cleveland. So we did a lot of community meetings where we just invited people to come and share their thoughts. We had more focused meetings with organizations that are involved with the community. And then we actually had one-on-one conversations with a lot of individuals. So that was, people who they or their family members had been involved in issues with the police. We also brought in experts. So, obviously we're lawyers and we don't know how to be out on the streets doing police work. So we wanted to get advice from actual people who are involved in policing work and who are involved in the study of best practices of how to do policing work. So we worked with a couple of experts who themselves have decades of experience in law enforcement, starting out as being patrol officers on the street and rising through the ranks. Both of them have been chiefs of police in communities that are similar to Cleveland, and they also are involved in a lot of academic and practice groups that advise the police. So based on that investigation, we analyzed all the information that we gathered, and we did reach the conclusion that the department engages excessive force on a routine basis. And that is a pattern or practice of using excessive force. And we broke that down further into different areas of concern. So we found that the department has an excessive use of deadly force, involving things like shooting their weapons or hitting people with their weapons. We found that the department also engages in excessive force when they use less lethal force. So that's force that doesn't rise to the level of potentially causing a death. So it's things like physical force, body force. It involves the use of tasers, the use of pepper spray, that kind of thing. We also found specifically that we were very troubled by the excessive use of force against people who are experiencing a mental health crisis. And that seems to be an area that the city really needs to do some work on. And then finally, we found that another area of concern was that the department seems to engage in poor tactics. So very often the department will, officers will engage in practices that are not the best option in that situation, and as a result of that, the situation will get escalated and ultimately end up in a use of force where it's quite possible that had they used better tactics, the use of force never would have needed to occur in the first place. So those were the areas that we focused on as what the problems are. And obviously those aren't the only problems, but they are the ones that we focused on in this report. And so we wanted to look behind it and figure out what we felt was causing those problems, what was resulting in the pattern or practice of the use of excessive force. And what we found when we looked into that was that the department has poor training practices, so the officers are not being given the training that they need to figure out how to resolve situations without resorting to using excessive force. We found that the policies the department has, the policies themselves are not giving the correct guidance to minimize the use of force, and that the way the policies are being communicated to the officers and followed by the officers on the street is not helping them minimize their use of force. We found that there is a lack of support for the officers in the areas of like equipment. So, you know, that the zone cars are inadequate. A lot of their zone cars do not have working computers. That, you know, the equipment that they're being given to engage in their work on the streets is inadequate, and as a result of that, you know, they end up resorting to tactics that they might not be able, that they might not need to use if they have the resources to engage in better practices. And then finally, we were concerned with the supervision. We found that the way that the supervisors are reviewing and guiding officers is contributing to the excessive force. So we also looked very closely at the accountability systems. You know, what is the department doing to detect and correct the problematic practices? And we found that there were serious shortcomings in that area as well. So those are basically the findings that are outlined in our 54-page report. And now that we've issued that report, we've come to the point where we are now, which is that we're looking for the solutions. What are we going to do to fix this problem? So the city, as you probably all know, has agreed to negotiate with us a consent decree, which is a court-enforceable settlement agreement where the Department of Justice and the city will outline what the solutions are going to be. We will summarize them in a written document, and that document will be filed with the court so that the court can actually step in to enforce what we agreed to do. And a really important component of the consent decree is that there will be a monitor. There will be an outside authority who will basically oversee the implementation of the consent decree. So there will be periodic reports to that the monitor, where the monitor will go in and look at what we've agreed to do, determine whether or not the department is actually doing what it's agreed to do, and periodically report to the court and to the citizens of Cleveland the progress on implementing the consent decree and following through with the solutions that we come up with. And so the consent decree will be in place for a period of years, and it will not, the monitor and the court oversight will not go away until the city comes into compliance and until it's determined that they are in fact doing what they agreed to do, and that it appears that they're going to be able to continue doing that on a consistent basis going forward. So, we have just started the process of negotiating the consent decree. The terms have not yet been defined. We have not yet decided with the city what it is that we're going to do to fix all of these problems. And, we could come in and tell the city, this is what we want you to do, go out and do it. But that might not necessarily be the best way to fix the problem, because, we can't get them to do it if there's not buy-in. So if there's not, agreement on the part of the city that that's something that they can do, and that that's something that, is going to work to solve the problems here in Cleveland. And just as importantly, this is an agreement for you. This is, you guys are the ones that, the citizens of Cleveland are the ones that are the most affected by the problems that are going on. And so we need to know what solutions you want, so that that there's support from the community too, because it's really, it's not just the police department that has to change. It's the relationship between the police department and the community. So that's why, we're here. We're asking you to tell us what you think needs to be done to fix the problems. So, what we're looking for is, very specific, concrete suggestions as to what you think would make the community feel like it has a better relationship with the Division of Police. So we're looking very much forward to the result of what you're going to do today and the discussion that you're going to have, and to the action report that you're going to be filing with us. And we really hope that you come up with some positive suggestions for us that will really help us resolve the problems. So, thank you. And I can take questions if you have them, or if you want to get right to talking, that's good too.
I have a question. We noticed that in the report there was no mention of any disparities based on race or bias. Can you explain some? We noticed in the report that there was no discussion of any disparities or issues regarding race or bias. Can you explain to us why that may have been the case, and is there any possible ability to kind of give some solutions towards that issue?
Yeah, no, that is something that we've heard a lot, that the report did not focus explicitly on race. And, I think that we've all reflected on that, and maybe if we could have gone back and rewritten the report, we might have done that. It wasn't one of the findings that we made, but that doesn't mean that the solutions can't help to resolve that problem. One of the areas that we did express concern about in our report was that the department moved very much away from community policing models. And, I think that the department itself has expressed that they're interested in taking up community policing again, and in coming up with some kind of a community policing model that they'll follow. And so hopefully that is something that will improve, the issues around cultural sensitivities. The other thing that we're hoping to do is more transparency and more community input and citizen input. And hopefully, those are the kinds of issues that community can take up directly with the department through whatever mechanisms we come up with for community involvement in policing in Cleveland.
I'm Brian Cummings with Cleveland City Council. To that point, there are a lot of concerns from the community that aren't necessarily in the specific investigations report. The consent decree agreement, as you've explained, I believe, will be an agreement between the City of Cleveland and the Department of Justice. In addition to meetings like this and letters and action reports to the DOJ, what more can be done from your experience to really ensure the full involvement of the community and community's interests relative to the DOJ and the city's negotiations, both in the sense of leading up to what's actually signed as a consent agreement, and then also post-signature, the actual implementation. Could you give some examples of how the community can ensure their interests are served?
Well, I think that, in the process leading up to the consent decree, this kind of thing is exactly what you can do. And I know that there are a large number of community meetings and community groups getting together to come up with specific recommendations. And so, when you do have these meetings, if you can produce some kind of an outcome that you can communicate to us and to the city. So I hope that the report that you're going to produce as a result of this process, you're not only going to give to us, but you're going to give to the city as well. Because there are, two sides of the negotiating table, and we both need to know what the community wants. DOJ is not, the only representative of your interests. The city represents your interests too, and the city needs to know what your interests are in the outcome of this consent decree. In terms of going forward, the consent decree, I think as we envision it, and as the consent decrees that have been negotiated recently in other cities, focus on trying to create an ongoing process that involves the community. So we hope that there will be an open-ended community branch of the consent decree, where even when the consent decree ends, there will be some kind of a community involvement aspect that will not end at that point. It will be built by the consent decree, but it will live on after the consent decree, so that there is always a way for the community to have a role in shaping policing policies going forward. And so, your ideas as to how that can happen will be very important in what we come up with.
Hello. I just wanted to comment and give my take on the solution as far as you were talking about community involvement and officers being involved in our community. Sometimes I feel like the simplest answer may be the best solution. Me personally, I used to work with a lot of children and daycare facilities inside the community, and actually having to outside, being a person outside of their community, I got to understand what they were going through and be able to relate to them. It could be something as simple as police officers starting a baseball league in the community, or basketball, or something where they can have a relationship and start at a young age to be able to trust and be able to relate to police officers, because I feel like that's where the disconnect is. It's kind of a us against them mentality sometimes, and on both sides, personally, I feel like. So I think that can be a solution, maybe just starting off at a young age with baseball and basketball.
No, I think that is a great idea, and I know that, I do think that community policing and the relationship between police and community has to start at a young age. And, for example, the old community policing program that Cleveland had, they had officers in schools. And, they had mini stations out in the neighborhoods, and some of them were in organizations where young people did spend a lot of time. And, I think there are lots of officers that want to do that too. I was riding along with an officer in the 3rd District who, he would stop and roll down the window and talk to the kids, and he knew them by name, and they knew him by name, and that was really great. But, if that's not a formalized part of what the officers are supposed to do, it's only going to be the officers that have a particular desire to do that. So that's something that we do need to encourage and get the department to make part of its formal practices. So I agree that would be a great idea.
Hold on, before we go any further. The solutions are going to be what we discussed in the breakout area. So if your thing is around a solution and not a question directly about the report, then you're going to discuss that in the breakout area. So if it's a solution, then that's it. If it's something that we're going to talk to them about directly around the DOJ report, then you're okay.
You've acknowledged that you've received many complaints or comments about not including racial disparity and racism in the report. Can you legally amend the report to include that? Because it's very important to define the cause of the problem before you can fix it.
Yeah, I mean, I think at this point we have finalized the report and, we're not going to rewrite it. Because honestly, it took us a year and a half to get to the point where we are with the letter now. But, as I said, we definitely have heard that comment and we appreciate it and we've taken it into account. And, I think the important thing is that we will consider that in going into the negotiations and figuring out what the resolutions have to be. That is an issue that is very much on the community's mind and that does very much need to be addressed by the solutions that we come up with.
And it can be part of the solutions that you all come up with too, that you make sure that it's included in there for our report here.
Ivan Williams, Precinct Committeeman, Ward 7D. In your consent decree, does it cover or include community policing such as RTA police, University Circle police, CMHA police, Cleveland Clinic police, who have essentially the same power as the Cleveland police in the city of Cleveland?
That's a great question, and I'm actually going to make a note about that. And the answer is no. So we only investigated the Cleveland Division of Police, but we definitely saw, like in some of the use of force reports, that, the uses of force result in a call from the Cleveland Clinic Police, and then, the Cleveland Division of Police goes out and responds and gets involved with that. So we didn't look at those other police forces, but that's actually a really good idea, and there's no reason that the community policing or that any of the other solutions that we come up with can't address the relationship between these other law enforcement organizations that operate in the city. So I'm definitely going to make a note of that, and I hope that goes into your report.
We're going to take the questions from everyone else that's here, and then we're going to finish with our speakers so that we can get started into our solution sessions, okay?
This might be. I need to know whether, is there a way that we can review and redo the psychological testing process that is actually used to eliminate people before they become a police officer?
Well,
So that we can look at the characteristics, really by an outside person to look at the real psychologist or psychiatrist, to look at the characteristics. It's got to be obvious that some of the stuff that people are doing, that these guys are doing, is...
That would be part of the solution session, so when you go into that session, it'll be part of that.
Okay, one more
So
thing.
definitely include that
Yes,
in that.
yes. And one other thing, could you redo psychological testing
that
on
would be also-
supervisors? So that they can be reprogrammed.
And that would be also in the solution. Definitely. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Kareem Hinton, I'm from Ward 14. I was, in reading or going over the DOJ report, I was curious as to the fact that though there was widespread acknowledgement of the abuses or the problems within the CPD, there was not necessarily a widespread condemnation regarding the judicial system which backed up all of that. So is there anything that is going to be addressed regarding that? And then the last thing, or the only other thing that I wanted to address, was in regards to, I know that we have a problem getting back the residency clause. So now, with us having a problem getting the residency clause, I know that's part of the solution. But I know that, but would you be, or is the DOJ going to be able to help us regarding that? Because I think that there's some kind of happy medium that we can make as far as maybe a term of 5 years that they live in the community. And that's pretty much where I want to go.
Yeah, the residency clause is really not something that we can address through the consent decree. And, obviously, as you know, that was deemed to be something that the city was not allowed to do. So I'm not sure that that's something that, ever could be reinstituted. That's a little bit beyond the scope of our ability. But, in terms of the court issues, we were only looking at the police, but obviously what happens, in the system after people are put into the system by the police is definitely an issue that we've heard a lot about. And that is something that we've had discussions with the community about building into the community involvement model, that maybe getting the courts involved too, so that, part of the community oversight will not just include the police, but will also draw in representatives of the courts so that those issues can be discussed with the courts too.
Are there any ramifications if this is not followed through on? What happens if the police department does not execute? And is there any precedent as to what will happen? Anything tangibly negative?
Sure. So that is one of the great benefits of having a consent decree, is that the court can require compliance and can push the city to do it. And the bottom line is, just because we enter into a consent decree with the city, that doesn't mean that we walk away too. I mean, if the city, and to make clear, I do not think this is going to happen. I think the city is going to do what they have to do. But if they did not, or if they somehow decided not to complete the discussion of the consent decree and enter into it, then we would have the option of pursuing a lawsuit against them. So we're here for the long haul, so it's going to get fixed. And I really am optimistic that it is going to get fixed through the consent decree process, but that's not the only way to do it.
I wanted to revisit a comment on the issue of race. You made a statement that in your findings, there was not a race issue or concern, which I find kind of appalling to me. As an African-American pastor and working with a lot of the gangs, members on the street, or just the neighborhood children, I've personally seen, and I know you took a personal ride-along, and I'm sure they were on their best behavior, but I live in Cleveland, my church is in Cleveland, I stay on campus. I personally see the interaction between CPD and the residents, and how they even approach just because they're dealing with African American males or females. My question is what example, what made y'all exclude that, come to the conclusion that it's not a race issue, when we can drive while black, walk while black, stand while black, and get harassed just because we're black, and no other reason, searched, dehumanized just because we're black, and I live this and see this daily. I'm interested to know what brought y'all to the conclusion to not put that in a report. And I'm also asking, since you said that you will not rewrite the report, but can an addendum be made to it? Because that's an issue that we cannot smooth over, ignore, or act like don't exist. It might not have happened on your ride-along. You gave an example of a friendly, call-by-name interaction with the police and a Cleveland resident. But I have interactions daily with the police calling the children by names and other names that are derogatory. That definitely is a race issue. So I'm just curious to know, how did you reach your conclusion?
Okay, so let me clarify that we did not conclude in our report that there's no problem with race in policing. So that was definitely not what we said. It was simply that we didn't make a specific finding of racial disparities. And, but we did recognize in the report that there are definitely problems between the police and the communities that they're policing. And so, for example, we talked about the November 29th shooting and how that definitely inflamed already existing tensions. And, other incidents that did involve African-American residents of the city, and how, treatment, the specific high-profile incidents highlighted that there is obviously a tension there. So we definitely recognize it, and we are not dismissing it or saying it doesn't exist at all. We're definitely not saying that. But in terms of doing the addendum, I mean, I think it's more productive at this point to move on and talk about solutions that will address that problem. So rather than, issuing another formal criticism of the city about that issue, to just include it in our solution process going forward. And I really think that, everybody wants to get this done quickly and to get the solutions in place as soon as possible. And taking a step back and revising the findings letter is going to slow that down dramatically. So, as I said before, we are very cognizant of the feeling in the community that the report should have addressed that issue. And so when we are talking about the solutions, we are going to take that into account, because we're not limited to solutions that are only addressing the explicit problems that we did find in the letter. We're talking about larger solutions that will encompass all of the problems, including the problems that we're talking about at these community meetings, of which racial disparities are definitely one of them. So it's not going to be ignored, and it's not going to be dismissed going forward in the resolution process. Okay, all right.
Actually, make sure, Eric is going to talk a little bit about it, but we know that on page 48 in the report, it does mention African Americans. So that's important for you all to know. So make sure that you read through the report, okay? So make sure that you take the time and read through that report, especially if you're going to make other solutions or suggestions or ideas afterwards, and feed those up